So he's here. And I just want to do a quick whip around. If you can just say your names and more or less what you're doing so everybody's on the same page.
I'm Sarah. I'm doing fine art, MA in 1 year. You saw me with my
Oh, the blue, yeah.
Yeah,
Nice.
that's it. Yes.
I'm Andre. Yesterday I was talking to Annie about shitting and object cathexis. Cathexis?
Cathexis.
Cathexis. It's my thing at the moment.
Okay. You never know you're a media artist, right? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm doing media arts and philosophy practice. I do a whole mix of things: analog, digital, code, transformation, lights, film. That's it then.
That's it then, okay. And you're also doing a project on the body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm doing a sort of film walking piece with sort of rhythm, and I'm gonna video map it and have it sort of like my legs walking all the way up the wall, and I might be using Isadora, but I haven't learned it yet. So
Okay.
that could be next term, but yeah. Speak to who? Okay.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary. I might speak to Mark.
You might speak to Mark, who does know
I
about
might
it.
not.
He does know about, you know about Isadora.
Isadora and course composing.
Yeah,
Okay. I'll talk to him.
He's been trained by
But
now.
I literally have 10 days, so if you're really quick, you're a good teacher.
He can.
That can be, yeah.
Yeah, he can do it, yeah.
Okay.
I'm Wendy. I'm doing stuff with clear resins as transparent objects, as metaphor for thought, for things you can't see but feel, so they're real. I'm trying to capture that in text and protocol.
Great. Excellent.
That's very good.
We have someone that can
How
summarize
better
their
it
work.
is.
It's well done. Okay.
I'm Natalia, and I'm just starting PhD in fashion design. And my topic is unseen body in fashion, which relate to ambiguity and a lot of uncertainty.
Great.
I'm Grace, I'm second year PhD, and I'm looking at women who produce ectoplasm and how it was documented.
Can you just say it a little louder because we can't hear it at this time because of
Yeah,
the noise.
I'm looking at females as mediums and how they produce ectoplasm, which is the materialisation of the spirit after death. In photography, but my work also moves into installation and film.
Great. I just love how you just talk about ectoplasm as the most normal thing. Let's Anita. Let's go backwards, Anita.
Hi, I'm Anita.
Nerves.
Yeah. Oh, let's come back.
Okay, we'll come back. Go
Hi, I'm Chi. I'm a fine art. Doing animation.
Great.
I'm Andrew. I'm just writing a little bit about obelisks as they appear in medieval paintings, what they mean when they turn up there.
I'm John of Arts, Practice and Education, and my practice is looking at materials and painting materials and teach.
Actually, can we turn that off? Can you just turn that off because it's really difficult to hear everybody. The button is to your left, up high, just higher, higher, left, right, rather.
Is that right? It's the light one, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. I don't know what it is. Okay. Never mind. At least the fan is off, so we can hear.
It's doing its thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm Mark. I'm a sound designer and composer. I've decided actually I'm not a musician.
All right.
I'm a sound designer and composer. I believe I saw you once in a lecture hall at Greenwich University.
Oh, yeah.
In around 2008, I think.
All right.
Traveling.
Yes.
That was accurate.
Does
Yeah,
that
that's
sound
accurate.
right?
Yeah. Good memory.
Good memory.
I'm Sarah. I'm in the second year of the MA Fine Arts, working with drawing and sculpture. Drawing and sculpture.
Mostly fine arts, MA, sculpture, and drawing, in abstract and film.
Good. Well done.
And doing some filming of drawings.
Okay.
I'm Christina. I'm doing course in project management. Interested in museum and art gallery.
Great.
I'm Annika, I'm doing history of art and design. I'm a writer and curator. Next week I'm curating a series of public space interventions across the city, and Sophie is going to be one of our artists.
Just looking at him blankly, like to know what I'm
No. And also going to be talking as part of the article launch.
Great.
I'm Natalia, and at the moment I believe I'm a painter. Full stop. We'll see what grows into.
And what type of materials?
Oil.
Yeah.
At the moment, oil.
On
At the
canvas?
moment on canvas. At the moment it is about portraiture.
Portraiture.
At the moment.
Okay. You've obviously been talking to Henry, hence the at the moment aspect. Or tutor. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Liam. I'm a sculptor. I like to use a lot of science, technology and physics within my work, and I've just managed to reclaim some of my work from last year from Henry's old office.
Well done.
which is a good find.
Can I see it?
Yeah,
Can you just put it?
One of the many sketchbooks, the little one and then the big one as well. Rather.
Yeah, can you just pass that around? It's quite an interesting piece.
Yeah.
You're working on fractals and.
Yeah, it's to do with each one of those is a sketchbook page that's been glued to the next one, and then what I've done then is gone back and sanded down to the layers to kind of create a structural landscape in a sketchbook. It was more to do with the idea that an idea in your mind is composed of thousands and hundreds of layers and levels, and that sometimes the idea may take on different shapes and forms, but ultimately sometimes it might be the same throughout, even though it doesn't appear that way. A bit like a fractal, it's kind of got like infinite definition as well.
I saw an artist in Armory who did like huge ones of those books that he exploded at scope. I can't remember his name. I'll look it up because I've got photos of it. I'll show you.
There were three different ones with different ideas, and then the bigger ones like this. Well, these are the mini, in between big ones. They were just like simulations of my sketchbook. So they're like
cool.
And they kept getting bigger and bigger until they were giant sketch, those huge things you can walk through. Yeah.
I'm Dane, I'm a PhD student. I research ideas of incompleteness and undecidability, especially with regards to real-time systems in digital contemporary art, and using that to develop a methodology of reimagining time without time, walk backward time again. And then
You took a breath. That was good. Well done.
Don't stop, and that's the most I've ever heard Dane speak.
It's great. It's great.
and then continuing that with some adventures by wild wanderings in software spaces.
Wonderful. Whoa! Very good. Yay, Dane. Okay. Dane is our resident physicist, basically.
I am Bruno. I'm a student of MA Fine Art. I work with drawing and installation. I start with this construction of architecture, but at this point I have some doubts.
You have some doubts. That's always good. Yeah. Excellent. Okay.
Develop.
Thank you.
I'm Tamsin. I'm interested in water and its relationship with porosity and membranes.
And how are you going to see that through?
I'm exploring a few different things at the moment.
Okay, so you don't want to talk about it?
No.
Okay, that's fine. Good. Okay. Did we get everybody? Yeah? Good.
So I'll just fill a little more about myself then. I'm doing Movember for all of you who are also doing it. I feel a need to explain that in case you see me again.
Without the mustache.
And I'm videoing a little bit, but I won't put anything up without you guys' permission. I work at YouTube.
It's already there.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
awesome. So, I live in New York, and I put sports on the internet.
Yeah, great. That's fantastic. That's very modest, actually. let's just leave it at that. Okay. So, just a couple announcements before we really begin. The first thing is Thursday, 4 to 7. I hope everyone will be here, or not here, but in the lecture hall, for the unveiling of Article Press that Grace and Dane and Andre and Jakob, whoever he is not here tonight, have been working their socks off to get on properly, so please come. And there'll be a debate. There's a couple of people who are going to be speaking by accident. They were rolled into this thing. Anyway, so that's the first thing. The second thing is for those of you that are applying for the AHRC, hello. You might need some chairs. Here's a chair. There's one here, and there's one here, so we're in good shape. For those of you that are applying for the AHRC research application, I'm going to be having a pre-meeting at 10 a.m. on Thursday, this Thursday, here. So if you're interested, we can discuss that. It's a complex process, this AHRC doctoral application. For those of you who are interested in doing a PhD next year, with or without funding, or with or without the AHRC in any case, there's a meeting for everybody on December 5th. I will send around, or maybe you've already sent it around, have I sent it? Yeah, so Grace is sending around, or has sent around, the link to go. And then on December 7th, which is a Saturday, there is yet another meeting by the whole of the BCU, so you'll see who the competitors are for this, to meet and go through each page with you.
On what was that?
On the 7th, Saturday. It's on a Saturday. I know.
That's my son's birthday party.
You can email them and they will give you the resources.
Okay.
You can't make it.
Okay.
But they're also in Nottingham and somewhere else as well.
Okay.
But it's for Birmingham and Birmingham University, BCU and Birmingham Universities.
Okay. Yeah.
What time is it, do you know?
I don't know.
It's
But
like
I'll-
an April.
It's all day. I'll send it around so everybody can see it.
We've just booked it, that's right.
Of course. So there's that. Let me think what else. Oh, and the deadline for this is the 9th of January, and you also have to already be accepted into the PhD program. So apply to the PhD program, get accepted. That's not that complex. If you're any one of my students, that shouldn't be a problem. And I mean, the students that are here, so I wouldn't concern yourself overly with that. But I mean, you have to fill the application, and come see me. Come on Thursday. Any other questions for that?
What time on Thursday?
10 a.m.
Okay.
Yeah. So did you come in to hear about the meeting for, if you're just interested in a PhD, that's also on the 5th of December. And then if you're interested in the AHRC, that's also on the 7th of December. Okay.
And that's the funding for.
That's the funding, yeah. Well, there's two funding streams. One is the AHRC, for which there will be very few people getting it. So, and the other is getting a bursary for teaching. So you get your tuition waived, and you come in that way. Okay, now since you two were late, it's all right. Can you now, because this is my brother Frank, he's here from New York. So everybody's going around and introduce yourself, so why don't you introduce yourself and yourself as well.
I'm Coralie. I'm in MA Fine Art, and I'm working on installation with stretching fabrics, and I try to make some relational spaces. I try to follow.
Yeah, it's good. And they're quite weird, your spaces. Very big, stretchy.
Yeah, really big. I hope it's going to be bigger and bigger.
It's big. I did take over the world. Wonderful.
And I'm Arch. I'm doing the Queer Studies and Arts and Culture Masters here, and mostly just do like big paintings on glass, and I'm trying to get into making some little figurines. But I need plaster really badly to do that. We'll see how that goes.
That's great. Good. Okay. Everybody okay? Ready to proceed? So we got a heavy meeting tonight, as you know, because you all know that we're doing negative dialectics. And what I wanted to do is give you a general sense, which I've so far failed to do by getting the images up. I asked you to take a look at The Night Porter, which is a film, 1974 film with Dirk Bogarde and Charlotte Rampling. And it is clearly not going to be able to be seen there, but I'm going to show you a clip from it so you get a sense. Maybe you can see, I'm hoping you will to see it on this tiny screen. We just couldn't get it to work up there, so I'm sorry about that. What I want you to look for is basically, how does a human relation get established in the absence of something. So I'm going to preface this by saying negative dialectics, and Adorno's Negative Dialectics, this is a book that is written to answer the question, why did fascism happen in Europe and not in the US? And not in the way in which it happened. Why did it happen? Why was it incapable of taking root in Britain in the way that it took root in Germany and Italy and so on? So that's one of the main questions that Adorno is asking, because some of the answers to the question of fascism has to do with, you know, people make the argument that it's capitalism or that it's, a big mob rule, somebody comes in, a dictatorship. How come it was able to seed itself and grow? And what Adorno wants to do is he doesn't want to give a psychological answer. He doesn't want to say, well, those Germans or, those Italians or those, fill in the blank. He doesn't want to give this psychological profiling answer because for someone like Adorno, it's a political question. So we're going to circle back to that word political and see what he's meaning by this. Now, I wanted you, like I said, to see this Night Porter because in this film, does anybody know what the story is with the film? The basic story is that the film opens up in Vienna in a certain time period after the war, World War II, and Dirk Bogarde is playing the Night Porter. He's a night porter. He's a hotel porter. And basically what he has to do is there's a lot of rich clientele, mainly women, and he has to have sexual relationships with them in order for them to keep paying to stay in the place. So he either has sexual relationships with them or he has a whole team of people that are set up to sort of make people happy, make these women happy. While he's involved with this whole little ring that he's running, there's a very famous pianist that comes in, or maybe he's a conductor. I think he's a conductor, and he's married to this very beautiful woman who is Charlotte Trampling. And when she comes in, the two of them, their eyes meet, and they realize she at first isn't sure, but it turns out that it's the case that he was the SS guard in the concentration camp that she was thrown into, and all of the horrors start to creep into this. Now, he is now a night porter, and he's got to serve her, but in the concentration camp, of course, it was the other way around. And so it's a study of how dominance and submission operate, how this profound intensity goes on. Now, I think what I'll do, before I show you this film, I think instead of showing it to you because it's on such a tiny screen, I want to just give you a little background about fascism itself and how to begin to understand this. The one thing that you should understand about the time period that we're in right now, let's call it the technological age, is that it produces mass. It massifies. And that's an interesting problem. This is the problem that Heidegger speaks about. This is a problem that, this has been going on for quite some time. This, you might want to say, from whenever you want to target technology. I mean, it's a wide comment, this word, wide argument. But it produces mass, and therefore there are at least two types of political systems that speak to a massification. One is democracy, is simply put, and the other is fascism. And the question is, how can democracy come out when the system keeps sort of moving toward a fascistic moment? Now let's understand what a fascistic moment is. For Adorno and the people that we're going to get into now, fascism is when the mass of the people, the main public base, agrees to have a dictator or to have a main leader running the state in a way that abridges the law, a way that breaks the law, breaks the kind of parliamentary law. That it's not just a dictator coming in and making everybody become, bend to the will of the dictator. It's rather that the people have supported this. That makes it very dangerous, and that makes it very difficult to dislodge. And there's very quiet ways in which fascism starts to grow in an environment. It's like a malignant cancer, you could say. And it grows very in a way that starts to bring together groups so that there's what is called the general will, or even the will. In fact, Hitler had a filmmaker, Leni Riefenstahl, who you may have heard of, I'm sure you've heard of her, who did this famous film called Triumph of the Will. And this is about saying that the will of the German people would come from the people and would show up through the president or the head of state, and then the head of state would then take that will and sort of dish it out and give it back to the people. So there was this movement that people would give over their will, their freedom, their whatever, to a fatherly figure was the argument in this case, and then that father would then sort of divvy it out. And so there's a whole way in which this operates. Now, as you know, since we've been talking about the question of the will and how the will gets developed, this question of the will that Hobbes in 1642 sets up with the Leviathan, that the will of the people gets brought through and established in a monarchy or in a democracy or in an aristocracy, that what do you do with this mass? What do you do with this massification that's going on? Well, the argument goes in Adorno and others, but we're just going to focus on Adorno, that feudalism, it's not that feudalism had no mass and that suddenly there was this mass blob that showed up during the Enlightenment. It's rather that the economic system is such that it provides a basis around which the voice of, quote, the people actually can be heard. So the danger in democracy is that it always has a tendency to go toward fascism. This is because, as we have been studying, dividing between leaders and led is always the first rule of any political move on any major political environment in order to create a certain kind of power dynamic. So any questions so far?
So dividing the leader.
What?
Dividing the leader from the people.
The leaders and the led. There's always the tendency to, and this means that if an environment is set up so that it's amorphous, the first task a political leader or political party needs to do is to create a border, create boundaries, and then to divide in those boundaries those that are leading and those that are led, leaders versus led. And this is what we were talking about last week with hegemony and these kind of crises. Now that doesn't always work. There's power vacuums. This was Caesarism. We were talking about that before. But the general position is to create, if there is no boundaries, make a boundary. Get a boundary going. If you can't get a boundary going, you're not going to survive very long as a political animal. So that's the very first stage. Now, beyond that, when this boundary gets established, we know that with the Hegelian move, the boundary was the totality. Remember that? So the universality, thesis, antithesis, taken together, creates a synthesis, comes back around and forms the ground. Is that making sense? We get this? Okay. So that totality, that notion of totality is already with a boundary. Now it's like the globe. The boundaries are odd. It's not like there's really an edge. But you could talk about the edge of the world without saying, well, we've really got a strong, thick line that creates this, this thing around which inside is one thing and outside is something else. And what Hegel is arguing is that if we can just come up with a logic that creates a situation so that everything that is versus everything that's not taken together is the whole of reality, and then one forms a logic around which one can analyze that, this is where Hegel is going. This is like game over. Perfect. And what Adorno and Marx, and we were going with Marx last week, what they're arguing is that that's true up to a certain point. This ability to create, or this requirement to create some kind of totalizing whole around which power can then be dealt with, doesn't quite answer the question, why is it that fascism works one place or gets settled in one place, and why doesn't it happen somewhere else? And this was the question that Gramsci asked, that I had raised before. What is it that it somehow is able to root somewhere and not in other places. So what Adorno argues in negative dialectics, he says there's two things you have to understand. The first thing is that in a fascist environment, those that do not fit in, or whatever does not fit in, whatever does not fit into this round totality, this full unity of knowledge, whatever doesn't fit in, that is considered the excess, or that is considered bad, or that is considered poison. Therefore, a society in a fascist scenario tries to only get those people who are within the totality to be the real people of the state. Who doesn't fit in for the fascists? The Jews, the Poles, the people who are mentally disturbed, the gay people, whatever. They had all the different triangles. Pink for gay, yellow for Jewish, black for mentally disturbed. They had white for something else. I forgot what the white one was for. Anyway, they had all. What was that?
Romanies. They didn't like the gypsies.
Yeah, but I forgot what the different colors were. They were quite creative on this particular level. So you could have like a bunch of triangles sewn onto your outfit. Anyway, and what Adorno said is that the difficulty here is that, first of all, those who do not fit in it's wrongly understood in the massification of an environment that if you don't fit in, then you don't belong. Not fitting in is only part of the feature of a democracy. It's a right in democracy. In fascism, it's a disaster. But in democracy, he's arguing it's a first cause. You have to. It's a principle. Now, he basically says, so the first point is that the fascist move is to make it so that that which does not fit in is considered the enemy. Of course, one has to understand, well, how do you understand how something doesn't fit in or does fit in? We'll get to that in a minute. The second thing Adorno wants to say is that analytically speaking, not sociologically speaking, analytically speaking, the excess or that which does not fit in is always a part of any full picture of the reality. And in fact, he wants to go further to say not only should it be a right of democracy, that is what makes human beings possible. And they're following Freud on this. And remember I told you when we were speaking about Freud a while back, that Freud, the thing that's important about Freud is that Freud, I mean apart from other things, is the first person to not use psychology but to use psychoanalysis. That is, say, make an analytic notion that the intelligence, that the way in which one understands something consciously is always a projection. It's always dealing outward. It's not like what you're thinking inward. It's a projection. And what Adorno wants to do, and of course the group that he belongs to, which is called the Frankfurt School, F-R-A-N-K-F-U-R-T, Frankfurt, the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School argued that you need to take on this question of sexuality and this question of the projection. This is very much a part of the Freudian move. And it needs to be incorporated into an analysis that allows you to understand how the totality of the world should not be closed, that there should be what's called an open totality. So you can think of the whole of the universe, but that whole of the universe, according to Adorno and the rest of the Frankfurt School, does not close. I'm going to start drawing this for a moment in a minute, just so you can hear it. I'm just giving you a layer here, just so you can hear it for the first time. We're going to go over it again. So he says, Adorno says, that Hegel got it wrong. Because the Hegelian analysis is about a closed totality. He's thinking, it's very logical, he has one position, there's only one way to understand reality, and that is this dialectical move that we've gone through before, and I'll go through again in a minute. And Adorno says the problem with this is that it puts forward a notion that all of knowledge should be closed at some point, and that you cannot account for the dirty, for the that which doesn't make sense, for the that which, you know, is a bit of pain, that's not part of the picture. And so this whole notion that the Nazis came up with degenerate art, or art is degenerate, depending on how you looked at it. The only thing that worked as art for the Nazi movement was this very tight, closed, featureless type of art, which is quite interesting in that sense. And it always had to represent this triumph of the will, this triumph of, you know, despair and, you know, whatever, trying to make it forward, make one go forward. Okay. Now, Adorno was part of a group called critical theorist. And today, in all academia, in Western Europe, well, in fact, in all of Europe, and also in the US and different parts of North America, this term called critical theory comes from this group. So whenever you hear critical theory, you're bringing in this entire movement. Critical theory it was basically a movement based on, it was a movement founded by mainly German Jewish intellectuals, men and women, mainly men. But Hannah Arendt was part of it, A-R-E-N-D-T, Hannah Arendt. Walter Benjamin, you've heard of. Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, Neumann. There's quite a few people that you will, but the main, Herbert Marcuse, who's somebody else? Who wrote the, Habermas, yeah, thanks. Habermas is kind of a hinge figure on this, but I'll get back to him. So these guys, they were German Jewish intellectuals. They were making the argument against Marx, but they saw themselves as promoting a Marxist argument. They felt that the Marxism of the turn of the century in the 20s and the early 30s was restrictive because it kept making this argument between the bourgeoisie and the working class and didn't, in fact, reflect reality. There was a problem because they could see that the working class was not as revolutionary as they wanted it to be. And there was a question, why is that the case? And again, why is it that certain places were more radical than others? Why does this happen? How is this happening? So they went back to Freud. They started bringing in Freud and started emphasizing the role of Freud to help understand methodologically this question of an open totality rather than a closed totality. You can have a totality, but it's open, and it can never close. And do you remember when we talked about Freud, and Freud's whole argument around being human was that one had to be neurotic. If you weren't neurotic, you weren't human. Do you remember his argument was about the fact that neurosis keeps you open in a very odd way. I say odd because we're going to use the word negative pretty soon. So I don't mean negative in a bad way. I mean negative in a strange way. Because neurosis is the font of being human for Freud. So the Frankfurt School wants to take this in, and they want to talk about how the social makes you neurotic, and how that sometimes that social that makes you neurotic is grounded or embedded in the wider social laws in certain countries and in certain exchanges, and not in others. And they're pushing this argument that one of the problems with the neurosis that becomes a cultural neurosis is that it the good news and the bad news, kind of the same news. It keeps one open, but sometimes that neurosis can get settled into a culture, in which case one is expected to behave in a very specific way, which is in fact a neurotic way, but in so doing that closes the path, because in fact your expectation is to act out a certain way. It's not your own ability to keep that neurosis warm, as it were, ticking over. And so the neurosis becomes reified. The neurosis becomes kind of static in a certain sense. And what Adorno and the Frankfurt School argue is that this neurosis is the cornerstone for how a society is able to have its own kind of mechanism that starts to reproduce this very specific kind of neurosis. This neurosis that wants everything to be the same, everything to fit in, everything to belong. And this, they argue, is the basis of how fascism very quietly begins to organize in modern societies. And in different degrees, of course, but in modern societies. So he says, there's two things, again, at the end of negative dialectics when we get to, because it'll be during Christmas when we finally get to this one, and it is very depressing. It's where he argues the whole role of Auschwitz. And Auschwitz he uses as a metaphor for, and you know Auschwitz was a concentration camp. Auschwitz was one of the terrible labor concentration camps where many people were murdered. He says that the thing about the German fascism, or in fact fascism, is that it doesn't just produce racism against, in this case, the Jews, the Poles, the Romani, and so on. It requires it. It requires the position that the society must somehow remain racist. That is to say, somehow exclude people on the basis of essentializing their humanness, so that they are black, or they are Jew, or they are female, or whatever the problem is. They are other. And this requirement to make something other, so that you have those people that belong, and then you have that group that doesn't belong. And that group that doesn't belong is allowed to see the table, but they're not allowed to sit at the table. So you can see it, but you can't approach the table. Did you have a question, Shakti?
Oh, that's right.
Just moving your glasses. Okay, so, sorry. So it gets very heavy, because what he's saying here is that the system, the more molecular this reification of neurosis happens, the more this need for belonging starts to settle. And the more it starts to settle, the more it begins to kick off this need to have us versus them. So the social horizon becomes very politically acrid, poisonous. So his main point is he's asking, why are the Jews hated? What is it about being Jewish or black or he uses Jew in a very wide area. What is it, this thing dirty? What's the problem here? Why are people having such an issue? And he begins to say, okay, you know, part of the answer to this question has to do with just this inability to accept difference. But it's not just an inability like that people just are nervous about it. It's been sort of hardwired into the DNA of the culture, so that the inability to accept difference becomes the way in which the culture is produced. So it is very open to any move that suggests a very strong form of belonging. And he basically wants to go further, and he's pushing this argument. He says, here's my question. All my people were killed. You know, his student Benjamin was, of course, committed suicide because he was being chased by the Nazis. And as I've told you many times before, Benjamin had done his PhD, and in Germany you have to have a second level called a Habilitation. And at that point, Adorno and Horkheimer had fled Frankfurt and had gone to New York and had set up the New School in New York. And Benjamin wrote and said, please take me on. And Adorno read his work and said, no, it's crap, I'm not taking you. And then, which is really awful. And Adorno never forgave himself, as I said, rightly so. And then the Nazis came after Benjamin. He fled with all of his, you can imagine the Arcades project, for those of you that have seen it, it's like 10,000 pages long, so you imagine all the notes, because there was no computers at that time. How he fled with all those notes is just incredible. And when he hit the border, he got caught. So rather than go in a concentration camp, he killed himself. So it's very, and it's horrible. So Adorno was so mortified about this fact that his own student he was such a jerk with, that he asked the question, how can we write poetry after Auschwitz? How can we have the gall to party, have the gall to laugh after Auschwitz? How is that possible? And he tries to answer that with negative dialectics. he tries to say, well, it's not so much how can we write poetry after Auschwitz, it's that we must write poetry after Auschwitz. Because the only way to keep open that totality is by the ability to recognize the poetic. And for him, the poetic could be summarized as the Jew, the black, the woman, whatever, the other, this thing called the other, the artist. So the Frankfurt School becomes known as the movement that puts art as the font of liberation. That the artist becomes that animal who's able to, for whatever reason, we'll get into that in a minute, keep that totality open. So it's a lot of responsibility, and at the same time, it's no responsibility because the artist just doesn't fit in. And just doesn't fit in. So when the artist does fit in, that's a new problem. But we'll get to that in a minute. So what happens when the artist's work actually works and you start doing well? I mean, it's a whole other issue. Now, yes? Oh, no. Okay. So let me just backtrack. So the first thing Adorno is saying, just to be very clear, is that he agrees with Hegel that one has to understand that knowledge and understanding how one relates to the world is a dialectical process. He agrees with Marx that it's a historical, materialist, dialectical process. And if any of these things, any of these terms are now unfamiliar with you, just do something like change your head or blink or something, so I know. So he says, yes, Hegel, you're right that there's only one logic. There's only one way. There's not 5 million ways of understanding reality. There's only one way, and that is a dialectical logic. But that logic has to be embedded in history. History is what keeps it open. The sexual, the dirty, the messy, that which doesn't fit in. This is what keeps the logic ticking over. So if you don't understand that logic is actually messy, then you'll keep reverting to, at best, a Hegelian logic. And so you'll not understand where art goes, or philosophy, or science, or any of these kind of things. So his first point is how to get that totality, which he agrees exists as a method, to stay open. So because once the totality closes, once it becomes a literal close, you can't have, you'll have the birth of fascism, and then you'll have basically the Dark Ages. This is what he's arguing. It's a disaster. So, but you can't legislate to have it. It has to be part of the society reproducing itself. So one has to understand, how does society reproduce itself? When I say reproduce, I don't mean just have children. I mean literally, how does it actually happen? He's saying, well, there's churches, there's schools, there's Rotary clubs, there's these weird sexual relationships people have, there's consumerism, there's a lot of stuff that goes on that makes the society have its common sense, its common denominator. And that common denominator isn't so common, as it turns out. So he wants to take a look at this. He wants to see, where does that fit in? So he then makes the argument that, first of all, the dialectical method is the only logical method. And that is not an opinion, that is not a standpoint, that is true. Just like 1 equals 1. That's a true statement. There's nothing complicated about it. The second thing he wants to say is that in order to understand the profundity of that remark, one has to understand how otherness, or how excess, or difference, or all these other words we're trying to come up with, how it not only matters to the totality, it's a part of the totality, but it's not necessarily a part of the totality in the way in which Hegel and Marx had put it forward. It's part of the totality in a negative form, in an absent present form. It's present, but it's not really present. It's absent, but it's not really absent. And what is the closest thing analytically to that? Not sociologically. So we're not sociologically talking about the Jew, the homosexual, the woman, the Romani, whatever. We're not talking about the sociological category now. Analytically, what keeps something open? How does it how does it manifest itself? He's gonna call that the poetic. He's gonna call that, there's other names for it. He's gonna call it immanent. He's gonna call it negative dialectical, or the negation. We're gonna look at it in a minute. We're gonna really start pulling this apart now. We're starting to get our hands dirty. So, when you think of a table, let's say this table, and you see the surface, you see the top of this, and I say to you, Natalia, paint the surface. What would you paint?
Just the surface, not the table itself.
So you wouldn't paint everything that hit the air. You just do the
Just
top.
hit the surface because this is the surface of the object.
What about the leg? Wouldn't that be a surface?
It's all the surface, isn't it?
Yes, the whole thing is the surface of the table, yes, you're right.
Okay, so now let's try it again. What would you paint?
The table.
The table. And
Because
paint
the table doesn't exist without the surface. If you take the surface away, there is no table.
No, that's not true.
No, you can cut the surface off and then there's another
But
surface.
then there is another
underneath.
surface.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's think about that. So you shave off, okay, so we have Sarah painting the table, paints everywhere, underneath or all over the place. And then Sophie comes along and shaves it all off with a mad saw. So I could see you doing that.
Yeah. Be cool, give me a chainsaw.
That's right, chainsaw, get it up.
Yeah.
Throws the surface off somewhere. What happens to the surface of the table?
It's here.
Comes back, right, it's just right there. Right, it changes. Who said that? Yeah, good. It changes, but it's still a surface. So the surface is part of the structure, but it's not in the structure. It's of the structure. You can shave it off and throw it away, but there's still another surface. You can shave it off and throw it away, there's still another surface. So the surface is connected to the object, but it doesn't define the object. That surface is what Adorno is going to develop as the negative of the negative dialectic. The surface of this universal, the surface of the totality, is like the surface of this table. And think of a totality, I keep showing you round, but think of a totality as being, I don't know, the shape of a table. It doesn't have to be round, really. It can be, shape of, I don't know, iPad. It can be anything. Anything that is an object can have a surface to it. And that surface doesn't fit in. And yet, it's part of the structure. So the first analytical move that he makes is to show you how all structures have in their component parts something that doesn't fit in and it's still part of the structure. So to argue that the social, he makes the next leap, to argue that the social is established in such a way that it doesn't, that you have to get rid of that which doesn't fit in, you'll never get rid of that which doesn't fit in. Every time you try and get rid of that which doesn't fit in, it comes back again. Get rid of it, comes back again, unless you get rid of the actual object. Goes the argument. That's part of dialectical questioning, dialectical positioning. Okay, clear? The next thing he says, that notion of that position is not, like he says, a view. It's not his opinion of it. That is reality. And if you don't understand that, you're not going to understand the nuances of it. You're going to miss it. You're going to miss those nuances. So he then goes on to say that that thing that doesn't fit in and yet is still part of the structure, that thing has a logic of its own. That logic he calls the logic of disintegration. Because he says, actually you can just get rid of that surface. You just go away. Goes right back up. It might be a very different surface, like you were saying. If nothing else, the table's thinner. But it's got a disintegrating feature to it. And he says, do not be afraid of the disintegrating feature. It's the neurosis of the social. That's okay. That keeps it alive. So he's trying to develop how this logic is operating. Now, I don't know how many people read also, we had a number of things to read, but we were also reading the child's question. Did you read that? Does everybody know the child's question? Can anybody, Dane, do you remember the child's question?
Why?
Yes. Good. And why is that the child's question?
Because it's the evil question that leads back to God.
Yes. All evil questions lead back to God. Yeah, no, sorry. Yes, and why does it lead back to God?
Because it's not answerable.
So, you know, why is the sky blue? Because of the wavelengths. Well, why are the wavelengths? Well, because of, you know, the way in which radiation operates. Well, why is the radiation God? I mean, eventually it's just like, okay, whatever, God. So it's the evil question. So that's always the child's question. And he basically says, the child will always ask this question. They're not evil in asking the question, but if you think that the answer, if you think it's answerable by asking it that way, it will never be answerable. And it will cause a closure. So he's trying to figure out how to keep this thing open, how to keep it breathing, how to keep it alive. Okay, questions so far? No questions, very silent.
Well, I'm thinking, I don't know if it's a question, but I like the illustration of using the table. And would you say that's a kind of, you know, you can imagine like taking the surface off the table, or a bit of the surface off the table, creates an imperfection, but actually in doing that it creates another perfection, like
Well, another
perfection,
surface.
imperfection.
Just think
Like what is
dirty. Just think messy. Dane, what are you gonna say? No.
Is the surface like the immediate?
Yes.
It's the here, you can't, you
Yeah.
are here.
The surface is the here of the now. That's right. Good. Everybody can hit him later. How did you get there? How did you get here? Okay. Now, I'm now going to show you this clip, if you can probably, hopefully see it. And I hope that it'll do what I want it to do so you can see this question of the open. That this open versus closed, I'm giving you two layers here. I'm saying open, closed. But obviously, to keep something really open, or keep something from not closing, it's not always necessarily a good thing. And what the night porter shows is this relationship that these two end up having, this very problematic SM relationship, where eventually she leaves her husband, and she and the night porter, Dirk Bogarde, they hole up together in a vacant room. They barricade themselves in, and they keep reenacting this really horrible moment of the Nazi regime, where she is. It's a very complicated sexual sort of engagement. Let me just show you this. I don't know if it'll. I hope you'll be able to see it on this tiny screen. You know. So let's see if we can do it. Okay, so she's left the husband. She decides to meet with this guy. There he is. Oh. Okay, so this is just, they're just taking outtakes from this. It's not the trailer that I wrote. shot at the head. Okay. What'd you say?
It was a song called Birdcatcher by Nathan's Company. It's a Soviet period rock group.
Yes.
in Russian.
That's right, Soviet, as in Russia. Thank you, Natalia. So, since we have the two Russians in here, what did you make of the song, and what did you make of what you just saw?
Well, I think the song is very, very close to the film. The bird catcher catches the bird catches the bird catcher. So it's the codependency of the victim and the victimizer.
Okay. And
So
how
that
does
is
that
brilliant
possibly
things.
work? Can you think how that links with what I've just been saying? Or is it just like, that's interesting? Where'd that come from?
It's all about power, isn't it, and tendency. And I think the reader does a very good job of that as well.
Derrida. No, the reader.
The film.
Oh, the reader, no, I haven't seen that.
Oh, it's quite similar actually. It's amazing. I think they've almost
Ripped it off.
because it's but it's the other way round. The guard is a woman, and it's played by Kate Winslet.
Oh, right.
And she seduces a young boy. He's like 15. And it's really, really good on the sort of power relationship of between something that he knows as well is kind of twisted and subversive, but he's drawn to it. It's like they're drawn to each other, but it's destroying them both, basically. And it destroys his life, this relationship. I shouldn't go on because the film is brilliant. You should see it. It's
Yeah.
good.
But why do you think, or in what way do you, yes?
Does it relate to each other?
Can you say it louder, because I can't hear it.
Does it relate to each other like a surface and the item?
Yes, can you develop that remark? You who are entering a PhD. So it doesn't count that you've got it, but anyway.
Yeah, like you said, it's not necessarily a bad thing if the surface and the item underneath doesn't really, like the object is a good or the surface is a bad.
So what's the object in that story? And what is the surface in that story? What we just saw? What do you think is the object and the surface in that?
Is the object the...
So the question
Is
is...
the object their love affair that
their relationship?
Yeah, their
I'm not
relationship.
sure it's a love affair, is it?
Okay.
Yeah,
I
love
was going to say the sex,
yeah.
and then the surface is the kind of dance they go through to do it.
No, but close. Everybody think about surface. Think about we meaning me. I've just had this longer discussion around how a totality gets established.
Well, it's about the relinquishing of the will, isn't it? The will is relinquished by the mass to the leader, and then the leader kindly gives back the will to separate. In my head it works.
But saying it out loud,
yeah,
nothing happened
it
there.
kind of falls down somehow.
But it's dealing with a question around S&M, a question around this exchange of power, and it's sort of sadomasochism all in one word as opposed to sado-masochism, where sadomasochism is the surface. I'm going to give you major hint number one. So that becomes the surface.
So the sex is the object, or the relationship is the power.
You're right about this power thing. Power is in there somewhere. No? People just guessing? Okay. We're not gonna answer the question yet because I need you to be brought to the answer. So let's circle back then. I want you to be thinking about this. Thinking about what is this relationship between the sadomasochism.
It's a master-slave relationship, isn't it?
Who talks about master-slave? Hegel. And how does he show up this master-slave relationship?
He says that the real power is in the hands of the slave.
And if you
Because
believe
he's
that,
the
because
only
of
one
snake oil.
who can change the balance of
And
power.
why does he say that? Or how, what's the analytic position that
Because
allows
the
them to say
master
this?
would not want to change the balance of the power. He's comfortable anyway. But the
You
slave is uncomfortable, so he would like to change.
Yeah.
Can't
If you
change
could.
it in an alien system like that.
Sorry, go on, Mark.
It's a closed totality, so you cannot change that. You cannot reverse the roles.
Good.
Yeah.
It needs to be open to
Okay, so,
at least consider in the reversing of the roles.
yeah,
So to continue.
yeah, no, it's, so we know in Hegel, we know in Hegel, we have thesis, and then we have on the other side of thesis, the point-for-point antithesis, or antithesis, right, with Hegel. So we know that that's on the other side, so if we had a piece of paper, we know that this is thesis and this is antithesis, and they're stuck together. So if I go like that, they run together. If I close up, they close together. And what Hegel is saying is that this is going to be the master and this is going to be the slave, and that taken together, it creates the system, which comes back around and gives meaning to those 2 points, right? And that the slave has the power, argues Hegel, because the slave can walk away, which is like, no, but anyway, obviously there's problems with the argument, but let's say if the slave realized or somehow figured out, or whatever, for other reasons, walks out of the picture, the system falls. Because of the two groups that ought to walk out of the picture, the slave has less to lose than the master. And therefore, Hegel argues that the slave is truly the real master. Okay, and one could actually make that argument in SM, actually. There's often that position, that whoever goes on saying that they're actually the master is really not the master, because in fact they're dealing with what the masochist is interested in having done. Parenthesis. Anyway, but what Adorno is arguing, and what that film is showing, is that this picture is the wrong picture. Because really where that relationship exists is here, not here. That the power, the way power operates.
So where did you draw it then? Outside on the edges?
What?
I just missed what you said.
Oh, I see.
Where it was.
That's right.
Standing
Oh, I got a guess now. Sorry.
Was it round the edge?
Yeah.
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 It's outside of these.
Well, it's outside, but in fact, it's not really outside,
Yeah, not
because
really
it's not
outside.
really an outside to a totality in this
Yeah,
context,
yeah,
right?
no, I know, yeah.
So this is the immanent position,
Yeah.
right? This is the becoming position, or the transcendent, or the transcendental position.
Oh, so this is the immanence that he's talking
You've got
about.
an immanence, right.
Adorno
Okay.
is talking about immanence.
Yes. Okay, now then we're going to go back to this. So in this case, in the master-slave relationship in Hegel, you have this very neat thing, and basically anybody that is politically alert will kind of realize that probably the slave doesn't really have the power, and therefore that probably is not the most accurate way of putting this. But what's also key here is that when you think about it, to keep a totality open, that's a very specific kind of power. That's a lot of power. Or that's, anyway, an odd form of power, because the totality is always attempting to close on itself for a longer discussion, which is not for tonight's lecture. Just take it as read at the moment that the totality is keeping itself, is always going toward closure. That the way in which the economy, the economic relations produce themselves in a massified environment is to close, is always to create this belonging.
Is that what we were talking about? The way who said nature isn't like a vacuum.
Oh, there you are. I don't know where that voice was coming from. That was very weird. Okay, sorry, say that again?
Nature doesn't like a vacuum.
Yeah. Yes.
You always draw it into a totality.
Yeah, so always try and close the whole, as it were, literally.
So, sorry, does that mean Hegel's totality is, in fact, possibly true, because it is a closed
Yes,
totality,
of
so
course.
we always tend to...
So the tendency is to close, the tendency is to belong, is to create that belonging. That's
so
the tendency.
Getting rid of the excess, we tend to always...
Get rid of the excess and close.
Right.
Okay? But it's not an ideological, let me put it like this. It's not an intentional thing. It's not like you're sitting there going, I'm going to close today. or I'm going to, Hercules, and keep the things open. It's not intentional. It's the system that has its logic is able to close. And that the system is always already going in a certain direction. So to change that direction is tough. Remember I was talking about Obama last week, and in the way in which he may wish to do 50 million things, but there's a whole big ocean liner he's dealing with, and to turn that around is very tough. So there's a direction to history. It's not a direction that has to be that direction, but the system creates a certain direction. So to shift that direction is a very tough thing. So to keep that direction from folding in on itself and becoming permanent is a tough business. And what that movie is talking about, what The Night Porter is about, is how this very peculiar move, this thing that keeps it open, is itself complicated. It's not just that there's, I don't know, like this Hercules standing between thing and keeping the thing open. It's that this thing called becoming, or immanence, we'll just use those two words, has a thickness to it, has a viscosity to it, has something to it, but it's a something that's unsayable. That's how Adorno calls it. He calls it the unsayable something, which is really wonderful. It's the great thing about being a philosopher. The unsayable something. And everybody should nod sagely. Yes, the unsayable something. Okay? So it's like, right? So, what's that? Say hollyhocks.
Paradox.
Oh, paradox, that's right. So, I've told you the thing about hegemony, right? My little joke, the joke about the fountain. After the fountain joke?
No.
I'm going to tell you a joke. It's a fountain joke. So this follows from the unsayable something as a term. So there was this guy who was sitting in class just like you're doing, and he was listening to the teacher speak, the philosopher speak, and the philosopher said, always remember that life is a fountain. I was like, yeah, right. He wrote it down. He was like, so he went off. And then he got a job. He goes through life. He's not happy with what's going on. And he remembers this one teacher that said, never forget that life is a fountain. So he thinks, that's probably quite interesting. I should really go find out what this fountain thing is. So he goes to the great priest in Rome. And he says, I had this professor once that said, never forget, life is a fountain. What do you make of this? And they're, oh, it's very interesting. Life is a fountain. Do you know what it means? No, I don't know what it means. Like it's obviously very profound. This unsayable something. Always remember, it's a very profound thing. And so he goes, but we can't help you. So he said, okay. So he goes to India. He goes to all the great gurus. And he says, can you explain to me this life is a fountain thing? Well, it's very complex. And it's obviously very important.
Use the fountain.
Always remember that you don't knock on the door in the middle of my lectures. No, so that life is a fountain, and they're going, it's very profound. I can see that makes a lot of sense, but we can't really tell you what it means. So he goes around. He's getting older. He can't believe this. He's not figured this out. And finally, he hears that his teacher's dying. He's like, the teacher's on his deathbed. So he goes over. He finds his teacher, and he says, sorry to bother you on your deathbed. I don't know if you remember me, but I was a student of yours 50 years ago in your class, and you said, remember the unsayable something. Remember that life is a fountain. And I have thought about that and thought about it. I left my job, I've crossed the universe, I have asked people. Really, who did you ask? Well, I asked the great priest, nobody knew. The great priest didn't know. No, the great priest didn't know. Well, who else did you ask? Well, I asked the gurus, in India, did they know? And he said, well, no, they didn't know. The gurus didn't know either? No, know, and I asked the physicist, I asked everybody, what does it mean that life is a fountain? He thinks, well, he says, maybe life isn't a fountain. All right, so that's the great thing about being a philosopher. So the unsayable something, very profound, but maybe it's not the unsayable something, as it turns out. Okay, so always remember that. So the unsayable something is about the way in which they're naming this thing that doesn't fit in, but still has some kind of energy, still has some kind of ability to make things stay open. This is the unsayable something. This is the that which does not fit in. This is what Marx refers to as the dirty Jewish moment we were looking at. This is the thing that is the dirt that makes the pearl happen, if you want to get really sad. Okay, so it's this thing that is required but doesn't fit in. So it's like you can't live with it and you can't live without it. It doesn't fit in, but it doesn't not fit in. So what the critical theorists argue is that, and this is the whole point about the critical part of critical theory. Critical theory doesn't mean criticizing every 5 minutes, bad, I don't like that. Critical means knowing the distance. How far can you get from an object before you can't see it? And how close can you get to the object before you can't see it? Because if the object is really close, you're not going to be able to see it. If it's too far away, you're also not going to be able to see it. So that thing that you can make it be seen, that's your critical distance. And that distance is what Adorno is saying is what the surface gives you in order to see. And if you don't understand or you don't allow for that distance, that particular level of critical distance, then the system will close in on you. You need to learn, says Adorno, how to write poetry after Auschwitz. How do you write poetry after Auschwitz? You learn about the critical distance. Too close, you can't see. Too far, you can't see. Questions so far? Okay, one last little story, and then we're going to take a break. 5-minute break. Yeah, 5 minutes. Okay, one last little story, which I may have mentioned, I know I mentioned to my PhD students. When I was a little girl, my father was doing his PhD when I was little. He used to have this desk, like an old wooden desk, and I used to sit underneath it. Just quite sad, really, but anyway. And one night, I decided, I couldn't sleep, it was late, well, it was probably 9 o'clock at night, but anyway, it was late for me. And I was really little, I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and I kept pressing my hand here, and it really hurt when I did that. And I was really worried, I thought I had, I thought I was dying. So I was very worried, so I knocked on the door of my father's study, and he was, working on his PhD at the time. And I asked him, I said, when I go like this, it really hurts. What does that mean? He looked at me and says, don't go like that. Okay? And that's always been very helpful. Okay? So that's your critical distance. Okay? Take a break. Cigarettes? Take a break. Come back. And we're going to break into the book, into negative dialectics. I think we now have a little bit of a layer here. What's that? That was his joke as well? That's so funny. When did he do it?
Did you get 6
This was the 16th. He stole it from my father. Good. Are you guys taking a break or not? You're not taking a break. See?
Yeah, let's go. Let's do it. Okay? Yeah, you can come with me.
Yes, exactly. Take a 5-minute break. Do you need to? Okay, he's taking a break. That's fine.
Well, 2 people left.
2 people left. Get someone to open a window. It's kind of warm in there. Do you find it warm?
Yeah. Just open the door.
Just open the. Anita, can you open the door? Anita, you have stress, do you? Are we stressed? No, you're okay.
That's good.
The epsilon, okay?
The epsilon is in statistics.
Oh, yeah, right.
Epsilon is the noise.
Okay.
Right, if you regression,
Oh no,
you find
we started
certainty.
on Monday.
You square the difference of the epsilon. At some point in time, you have your measured points, but you always added this unknowable piece called the epsilon, which is just the other.
The other thing you have
just
to
don't
add.
measure.
Yeah, right.
That's the epsilon. The epsilon, and that, and together with the epsilon and the points you plotted, you then get your regressive one, which is your certainty.
Wow. Do you mind repeating that?
Right now.
Can you memorize that? Memorize that statement.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
So that's how you do regressive analysis.
Yeah, so with the way, and then you have these, there are these two things you look for amongst many about whether or not you have plotted something correctly. You can begin to get a higher confirming value the more variables you add. So I can add like 1,000 variables that have a very highly predictive formula, but really just add a lot of variables. A lot of variables don't actually correlate, so you got correlations that they want to get rid of. And then you get a whole plot line, and then you can say, oh, you know, when it rains, how many toasters are going to sell?
Interesting.
Wow. So you can plot that out. It's all based on probabilities. The central limit here is the theory that all things will, everything basically goes to the normal bell curve. So that you can begin to make, once you I don't have proofs for it, but once you begin to know that everything that's sort of uniformly independent random variables will always tend to follow a central bell curve.
Never anticipated that would be a problem.
So, assuming there's not, someone's not loading the dice,
Sorry?
you can look over the history of all of your students, and there will be a bell curve.
I don't know what.
Interesting.
That's very
You know
interesting.
what's once you know that, and once you know what the standard deviation, what there's a standard deviation, the spectrum of the bell curve is you.
Yeah.
And whatever, once you start knowing it, then you can begin plotting things. Just without ever tasting wine, formulas for that kind of thing.
What do you mean Lacoste history? What do you mean Lacoste history?
Oh,
Explain that.
if you were to, so if you have uniform independent variables, which let's say each of you is a uniform independent, each of you are a student, we're not like going and saying, hey, I'm only going to get students from this one town, right? It's random who came in here, I mean, you're somewhat self-selected, but it's amongst all PhD students, somewhat random. That if you then looked at a large enough sample, you would have a bell curve. I know you may be a bell curve on, you know, how often people show up on time, or how some picks up, or anything. Here, the central limit theorem will say that independent random variables will form along a bell curve.
Well, both of them are coming back here.
And so you can begin to plot that if you have a large enough sample.
So is it possible to manipulate that?
Had it
By, you know,
I know.
others
No, I asked the caretaker if
the artist wanted.
If you,
Because
oh, Johnny, you can't take it
in some way or another as a project.
Oh, that's
Find that.
Are you then stretching
That's not the one you said.
Well, so we're at the tip of my skis here. This is basically a statistics. So I imagine the answer would be yes. Because if you're at the extreme and you start influencing the tip of the curve, you're no longer a random variable. Right, you're now actually trying to impact what's happening, and you will now, and that's actually, let's say we shift to business, that's how businesses try to shift what's happening. So as I'm listening to this I think what you guys are doing is pretty amazing. I'm listening to this and I'm comparing the Adorno system and this sort of otherness to Google, where we're trying to basically be relatively open, but sometimes I feel like we are, versus Apple, which is much more of a closed system. And where the people who buy Apple products willingly buy into and give to Apple the authority, and on the other hand, the people who buy Google products oftentimes we produce products which aren't very good when they first come out. In fact, that's unfortunately what we're known for. Don't buy the first 100 iterations of anything Google does. Because the first few are just kind of being developed by the people who play with it. And I was just thinking, I wonder if it's like, you know, some sort of forced openness.
Can someone turn on the, that thing? Projector again?
She replied and said I've sent it to the marketing department at BCU and I've sent it to such and such. But I don't know whether she's actually sent it to any students.
No.
That one that's.
Yeah. Yeah, should be on. Give me a second.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, which? I haven't. Yeah, the joys of trying to get those things away.
Okay, so what I'm doing right now is we're putting up, I'm gonna put up the Adorno, whatever shows up. The Adorno thing that I want you guys to read from. Which is, the first thing we're gonna look at is the translator's note, which is the very first of the book, but if we can ever get this thing working. We're almost there. I figured if you guys went on your break, this would all be working by the time you came back, but no. Really a very slow machine. Right. Not responding.
Is it that PDF?
Yeah.
I've got it on my Mac here.
Are you, well, hold on, I think it's gonna come back now. Seeing that the movie I want to show is not working. Arch, can I ask you to work on this? Okay, so you can just move the cursor. Yeah. Sure. Well, that's not even right. Okay. Can you see this? No. Translator's note. Ha, good. Let me make this.
Scroll down to the right top a little bit.
Here. That one?
There.
You can move it up a wee bit, Johnny.
There? Full screen.
Oh, you want full screen?
Yeah.
Is it full screen?
You've got a full screen icon, look. Click on
Where?
the icon mark.
Is there a full screen
Yeah.
icon?
Yeah.
Oh, there.
There. That one.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right, does it change messages?
Did you click on it?
Yeah, that one.
And then you can zoom in.
That one, yeah?
Yeah, then
Yeah.
zoom in.
Okay,
Click
then zoom in.
Zoom. That's it.
Yeah.
One more zoom.
One more zoom.
Yeah.
Well done. Okay.
And where we
Okay, I'll do it. Okay, that's right. Okay, so what I wanted to just show you first, because I want to make sure you've seen this, this is one of the questions you need to answer, is dialectic on a standpoint, is translator's note, and then I'm going to go through this now. Logic of disintegration and indissoluble something. Okay, so those are the things that I want to cover tonight. Ready?
Yeah.
Thanks, Archie. Okay, the translator, who, I mean, I like this edition because I think it's one of the best translations of the German into the English. They have some newer ones out, but here we go. Now, he brings up, Ashton brings up a very interesting point around trying to translate Adorno, which is basically he tries to make the argument, what is translate? How do you actually translate something? What does it mean to translate something? Do you do a literal translation, in which case it becomes meaningless? Or do you try and get the gist of what's being said, in which case you lose the style of the writer? So he makes the argument you have to always go for the latter because there's no such thing as a point-for-point quote translation. That would not work. It'd be translucent, and therefore you wouldn't have any understanding. And therefore what you have to do is have a real understanding of what's going on, and then you can kind of put the gist down. And what he basically says is that he didn't understand what's going on, and that he had an issue. And he tried, so he says, I consider the #1 rule for translators of philosophy never to start translating until you think you know what the author means by every sentence, indeed by every word. Come on in. That's right.
Who's this translator?
Ashton. If you go down to the second, you'll see it in a second. So he basically says this did not make any sense, and he couldn't do this. So he says, I wondered how I could do this, and but the enigmas piled up. I found myself translating entire pages without seeing how they led into anything. And so finally he was about to say that it was untranslatable when he thought that you don't read the book, you just translate it. Now this is a very old expression that comes from Philo de Alexander, which I told you before, who translated the question, in what language does God speak in? And his answer was, God speaks in the language of translation. It's not reading, you don't literally transpose something, it's not a transposition. It is that something becomes an unsayable other, or a sayable something, but you're not exactly sure what that something is. So if you just scroll down a little bit further, he says, what you need to know is, let's see, just a little bit further down. Sorry about this. He says what you need to know is, a little bit further. There we go. Okay. Oh, sorry. Let me just find it here on my pad. Right, it's not. He basically says, in order for you to really understand what's going on, he came to realize, is that you have to know all of Kant, part of Hegel, or all of Hegel, most of the German idealists of one kind or another. And he basically says, at the end of the day, there's no way that you can know all this stuff. So don't give up. Just translate it. Just read it, as it were. Sorry, lost the page. So he says, find it for you. Apologies. He says that, okay. If you do want to get to the bottom and dig, however, there are, I believe, 3 keys, not to Adorno's philosophy, but to his presentation. They will unlock not the substance of his thinking, but the formidable formal gates along the way to it. They will greatly ease your path through negative dialectics. The first key is the title. In his preface, Adorno calls it paradoxical, which was the word that, John, you were using. Or maybe you were using, somebody said it over here. Yeah, John. Is the word paradoxical. Explaining that one of his aims is to rid dialectics of such traditional affirmative traits as trying, quote, to achieve something positive by way of negation. But this logical sense of negativity is not the only one in which is pursued here. In this book, the word negative has all the meanings found in an unabridged dictionary and then some. Logical, ethical, utilitarian, political, so on he goes. So he goes on to say that you need to get a sense that there is an implied use of this notion of the negative. It is implied that there's philosophies, there's counter-philosophies, there's contradictions, there's non-contradictions. This all comes in to the question of the negative. So remember that part. The second is that the implications have some kind of usage. Much of this book is dialectical in the traditional sense of Platonic, Kantian, Hegelian dialectics, but all of it is dialectics in the popular, commonplace sense of skilled argumentation. It never addresses itself to philosophical problems, always to other philosophies. There's a chapter against Heidegger, with a few swipes at Husserl and Jaspers, another against Hegel, a third against Kant. The targets cover an impressive range. And he goes on that if you want to understand this, then you really have to have a very broad palette. And not to mention sub rosa, he says, the problems of the 20th century Marxist establishment, which is what he really, what Adorno really hated. The author, Adorno ends in his preface, is prepared for the attacks to which negative dialectics will expose him. He feels no rancor and does not begrudge the joy of those in either camp who will proclaim that they knew it all the time and now he was confessing. The two camps are East and West, Marxist and anti-Marxist. To the latter, Adorno had nothing new to confess. He had never made a secret of his convictions, but he had striven long and hard against his doubts, and when he could not repress them anymore, he felt obliged to defend them. At bottom, this book is an apologia for deviationism, a Marxist thinker's explication of his inability to toe the lines laid down today for proper Marxist thinking. So he then goes on to say that what you have to go to, if you go to the page 10, 11, 12, he says that the problem is that he says that the judgment around Marxism and anti-Marxism is that they have both forgotten Marx's famous dictum about the philosophers who were content to interpret the world. What matters is to change it. So he then says, look, you do not need to know Heidegger. You need to know what it is to have German idealism, what it is to deal with this question of the dialectical movement, what it is to deal with Marx and Engels. If you have a chance to read James Joyce, quite good. He gets into this whole thing that basically at the end of reading the introduction, if you have made it through the introduction, it will be a miracle. Because you'll think to yourself, there's no way I can understand this work. As he goes on, he keeps saying, I hope this is making sense, but he is not in any way, Adorno is not in any way trying to deal with his critics. He's trying to answer the question, how do you write poetry after you lose everything? Hope, reality, life, whatever it is, how do you do it? That's what this book is about. So this book is saying the answer to the question is understanding this thing called the ensayable something. The ensayable something for Adorno is what turns out to be the surface that I was just talking about, that creates the way in which totality ends up making sense and having difference at its heart, at its core. So we go now to Dialectics, Not a Standpoint, which is I think on page
4, isn't it?
4, yeah, thanks. in his discussion on this, he's going to say that there are fashions in every intellectual environment. Or as he puts it, nobody escapes the marketplace. And he almost says it's almost like a stall. People put their works out as a stall, and they're all calling dialectic, rhizomatic thinking, this kind of thing. It's all like a stall. And he's saying that he is not doing that, although he is of course doing that. He's saying it's not a standpoint, it's not a view, it's not a position. It is correct. So, Dane, you want to read that out loud? Can you read it? Just the first two paragraphs.
No theory today escapes the marketplace. Each one is offered as a possibility among competing opinions. All are put up for choice. All are swallowed. There are no blinders for thought to done against this, and the self-righteous conviction that my own theory is spared that fate will surely deteriorate into self-advertising. But neither need dialectics be muted by such review, or by the concomitant charge of its superfluity, of being a method slapped on outwardly. At random, the name of dialectics says no more, to begin with, than that objects do not go into their concepts without leaving a remainder, that they come to contradict the traditional norm of adequacy. Contradiction is not what Hegel's absolute idealism was bound to transfigure it into. It is not of the essence in a Heraclitean sense. It indicates the untruth of identity, the fact that the concept does not exhaust the thing conceived.
Okay, stop there. So what does that mean? The most important thing, if you learn nothing else in this course, this first semester course on contemporary philosophy, is the sentence, the name dialectics says no more and no less to begin with than that objects do not go into their concepts without leaving a remainder. What does that mean? What does it mean for an object to go into its concept without leaving a remainder? There's always an excess. That the concept can never capture the truth, the full truth of reality.
It's the immanence.
Because the immanence is the surface, and if a concept doesn't recognize the surface around which it is somehow embracing or expresses the surface, then one will lose the nuances, that which makes life actually real, the sexual, the smells, the death, the decay, the laughter, the boredom, the whatever, the ennui. The name of dialectics says no more to begin with than objects do not go into their concepts without leaving a remainder. Or to put it slightly differently, objects always go into their concept and they always leave a remainder. There is not a unique fit. And then he goes further. Contradiction is not what Hegel's absolute idealism was bound to transfigure it into. What's the it in that clause? Can you move that page down a little bit? I think it's up too high. Oh yeah, there it is, at the very top line. Contradiction is not what Hegel's absolute idealism was bound to transfigure it into. What's the it? What's the it that's being transfigured in Hegel? Let's try again. The name of, can you just lower the screen slightly so that they can see the sentence above? There you go, that's it.
Dialectics.
So the name dialectic says no more to begin with than that objects do not go into their concepts without leaving a remainder, that they come to contradict the traditional norm of adequacy. What is it? What is this contradiction is not what Hegel's absolute idealism was bound to transfigure it into? What is it? It sounds all...
Is it the excess?
It is the excess, but how do you understand that in terms of this thing, contradiction that Hegel's talking about? What happens in Hegel's contradiction? What happens in sublation?
There is and there isn't.
And then what happens? There is all that there is and all there's not.
And it gets
sublated, and then what happens to the sublation? It goes back to the ground, and then the ground creates
the purpose for the
first two things, and then it continues.
So it's cyclical.
It's cyclical, and in fact, what happens to the sublation, which you could say, when we learned that word to start with, which was our coffee word, right? The sublation actually ends up being the excess. Being, what is it? So, in fact, what is sublated for Hegel gets drawn into the totality, and it just continues this little path. But what Adorno is saying here is that contradiction is not, or to put it, let's put it like sublation that is swallowed up is what in fact Hegel is putting forward. But actually, if you really think about how a dialectic operates, says Adorno in that very complex sentence, that in fact it transfigures into something very different. It is not of the essence in the Heraclitean sense, that is to say that there's a kernel of what is to be boyish or Jewish or girlish or shoe-ish or whatever. There's not an essence to a meaning. In fact, what there is that this something creates an untruth. An untruth is not the same thing as a falsity. You know, an untruth is just the other side of truth. Just the that side of truth, the not side of truth, the unside of truth. It indicates an untruth of identity, the fact that the concept does not exhaust the thing being conceived. You can say, this is Johnny, this concept, and the concept Johnny can only hold a very specific sense of this thing, Johnny. Johnny will always exceed concept. We can talk
about underdetermination.
What's that?
Is he talking about underdetermination?
No, it's rather like saying in terms of the film, The Night Porter, if we wanted to understand, well, how does that notion of power operate? If we said that we had this thing called the notion of power, the notion of power as such holds a certain core of it, but it's not going to be speaking about this kind of very complex dance that happens in The Night Porter that escapes the concept. And he's saying that should escape. It's not even that it's not a position that those kind of nuances will always escape, but it's those nuances that make it real. Does that make more sense? It's not an underdetermination. It's really saying that there's something that gets expressed in the contradiction that can't be folded back into the concept. It will always sit outside the concept, but not so far outside the concept. It's the surface. So it can't go running off, you know, down the road to Starbucks. It's not going to be standing over there. It's going to be very close because, like you know, this surface is a part of this, but it's not connected. It's not internal to it. It's not a core to it. It's not. The surface is not the essence of the table. The table is the essence of the table.
So with that open totality, then, as those essences get reinterpreted back in, then there's another essence still outside.
Right. Can you say that again so that people could hear that? That's exactly right.
So as with an open totality, as that essence that is escaping gets sort of pulled into the totality, then there's another essence still out there that still isn't involved.
Which is still going like so, right?
Yeah.
So
the essence.
The essence. Well, yes, it's not really essence isn't really quite the right word. That's right. The U word is fine. It's really the excess. So this thing that doesn't fit in. So in Hegel, you know that Hegel says that when you complete the whole movement of the absolute spirit, knowledge is both the highest form and the ground, right? That's where he ends up. And Adorno's going, and then there's this other thing going, you know, I sit outside of knowledge, but I'm still attached to knowledge. So he's saying that Hegel's logic closes down and creates the logic, the analytic sociological logic, to make an argument that you can get rid of an excess, that it makes sense to get rid of an excess, that either the excess goes away somewhere or you bring it in to the social whole. And he's saying, no, that's a problem. That kind of problem forms the positionality around fascism. It's very damning what he's saying. You need to hear it. We'll just keep going over till you can finally hear it. Let's try it again. The name of dialectics says no more to begin with than that objects do not go into their concepts without leaving a remainder, that they come to contradict the traditional norm of adequacy. What's the traditional norm of adequacy? The way in which one understands a concept. Common sense, you know, the way in which it becomes, that's the concept. That's my view. That's the whole picture. Contradiction is not what Hegel's absolute idealism was bound to transfigure it into. So he says that in Hegel, we know that we have thesis, and we have antithesis. Well, antithesis. And this is always on the other side of that. And so when it gets sublated and it forms the whole, what happens to the antithesis? It disappears. So what Hegel argues is that a contradiction sucks it in and creates another movement. And what he's saying is, nope, doesn't suck it in. And if you fall for that, you'll be willing to say that slaves have power. Oh wait, he says that, Hegel. You know? So that's what he's saying. You see, the problem is that Hegel's logic makes sense, it just isn't correct. It makes a lot of sense. In fact, it's the basis of a lot of Euclidean geometry, and certainly a lot of religious positions. But he's saying the problem is, the good news about Hegel's dialectic is you start seeing that things have at least two sides to everything that exists, or in fact three sides. But he's saying, in fact, it actually has this other aspect, which is the surface that people are just ignoring. And this surface itself has these nuances. It is the night porter. The surface is the night porter, where you can't close it in and exhaust it by the concept. It's the ectoplasm. See that? Do you see that, Grace? Now. Okay. Can you continue then? Yet the appearance.
Yet the appearance of identity is inherent in thought itself, in its pure form. To think is to identify.
Okay, what does that mean? What does it mean to say to think is to identify? What's he criticizing here? What is he saying? We know that a concept, that what makes something a concept as opposed to an abstract or a model, is that it exhausts the whole of what it's about. Then it's allowed to be called a concept. So that a concept has meaning, and meaning has an identity. So he says the appearance of something with an identity, this thing called Johnny here, this thing called philosophy, this thing called art, is inherent in thought itself. What does he mean? In thought itself, in this pure form, you have thesis, antithesis. You take it together, it creates the synthesis, and the synthesis comes back around and creates the whole picture. When you got the whole picture, you have meaning. To think is to identify. So he basically says, so stop thinking. Because what's happening here is you're thinking in a pure form, and that's only going to get you to make it all that fits in, and the rest that doesn't fit in, you don't want to know. And when you don't want to know, that's the thing that keeps it open. That's the thing that makes it work.
It's a bit like Marx, isn't it? Like
yes.
we were saying last week.
But it's not exactly like Marx.
No, but he says the problem is that if you think too much and don't act, you're not, philosophy sort of stops.
He's saying, no, what Marx is saying is don't ever give up thinking.
Yeah.
But if you sterilize your thinking, if you don't want to get your hands dirty in your thinking, then you're not going to ever understand how reality operates. And you're only ever going to really come up with a model of reality, not reality. So you're not going to know how to move politically or in terms of power. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You're just saying yes.
No, that's what I meant to say. I was trying to say that, but it was like, you know.
It wasn't happening.
Yeah.
Okay.
Marx said the sensuous was at the core of perception.
Good. And if the sensuous is at the core of perception, where does the sensuous sit in Adorno's example?
It's the dirty and the...
And where does the dirty sit?
On the surface.
In his pants, did you say? Well done. I love you, Wendy. Thank you. Where does it sit? Where does it sit?
On the edge.
On the edge, on the surface.
Yeah.
Right. You just need to keep thinking about how the surface operates. So, no, it is his pants. The pants on the surface. In fact, isn't that a British expression? Pants? It means something's bad.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pants.
Yeah.
I always love that expression.
Yeah.
Oh, pants. I feel like I'm in the 50s or something. It just depends. To think is to identify. Okay, continue.
Conceptual order is content to screen what thinking seeks to comprehend. The semblance and the truth of thought entwine. The semblance cannot be decreed away as by avowal of a being in itself outside the totality of cogitative definitions. It is the thesis secretly implied by Kant and mobilized against him by Hegel, that the transconceptual in itself is void, being wholly indefinite. Aware that the conceptual totality is mere appearance, I have no way but to break imminently, in its own measure, through the appearance of total identity. Since that totality is structured to accord with logic, however, whose core is the principle of the excluded middle, whatever will not fit this principle, whatever differs in quality, comes to be designated as a contradiction. Contradiction is non-identity under the aspect of identity. The dialectical primary of the principle of contradiction makes the thought of unity the measure of heterogeneity. As the heterogeneous collides with its limit, it exceeds itself.
Okay. Translation, anybody? Hegel says that the in itself, that if it doesn't fit into the concept, it is not definable. It can't be identified. It can't make sense. It can't make meaning. Therefore, it's not necessary. It's mere appearance. And what he says is, I, Adorno, need to break away with that. I need to bring in this thing called the immanent, because if you keep saying, what I have here, the thesis on one side, the antithesis on the other side, this thing in the middle, the so-called middle, this is the excluded middle, which neither fits in there, nor fits in there. He said that notion of the excluded middle will mean that you are always getting away with allowing for that which does not fit in to just be useless, meaningless, unnecessary. And the only thing that's important then is that which does fit in. He says, as the heterogeneous, that is to say, the one that includes this thing called the excluded middle, that there's this side, the thesis, there's this side, the antithesis, and there's this side called the excluded middle, the deep cut, the dark, the thing that makes it so that meaning can make sense. Because if we don't have a deep cut, remember, if you just have water spilling everywhere and you don't put some kind of marker in, you can't make it make sense. It just goes everywhere. So a marker is always required, says all the philosophers until you get to Einstein, a marker is required to make something, literally create sense. You need a marker, you need a thing. And what Adorno is talking about is this marker creates a heterogeneic environment around which this not fitting in is crucial to the picture. It doesn't fit in, but that doesn't mean it's not part of this dilemma. I have no way but to break imminently in its own measure through the appearance of total identity. Since that totality is structured to accord with logic, however, whose core is the principle of the excluded middle, whatever will not fit in this principle, whatever differs in quality, comes to be designated as Jew. That's what he's saying here. That must be gotten rid of. And he's saying, no. That which does not fit in, that which is a contradiction, is precisely the thing that creates the real aspect of identity. And he's calling it the principle of non-identity. The principle of non-identity is this thing, the excluded middle. But we know from our discussion so far today, is that this excluded middle visually should be understood as the surface. So when you spatially envision this thing called the excluded middle, don't see it between things, see it as the surface of the object. That's the excluded middle. So the excluded middle in the Hegelian move looks like this. All that's A is on this side, all that's not A is on this side. Taken together creates the whole picture. And what Adorno is saying is that, well, it's true it creates the whole picture, but what you're leaving out, Hegel, is that whole picture requires the excluded middle to make it make sense. Otherwise, your little story doesn't work. So he basically says that dialectics, the dialectics he's talking about, is the consistent sense of non-identity. It does not begin by taking a standpoint. It's the picture. It's the real picture. This picture looks like a nice picture, sounds like a nice picture, talks and walks like a nice picture, therefore it must be the right picture. No, he's saying it's not the right picture. That kind of picture leads to very difficult, bad ways of analyzing things, even though on some level it's very helpful, because at least you have a concept and not just a bunch of opinions. The problem is the excluded middle keeps being seen as being neither on this side nor on that side, and therefore can be excluded. Is excess. It says, all right, let's call it excess. Just understand it to be an excess that's always attached to the structure. Yes?
Is the form of it more toroidal than like a donut?
More what?
Like a donut.
In what? How do you mean a donut?
In the excluded middle actually.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. In fact, it's like a bee, like the Chinese bee. You know, which is, you know, you can look at it.
It's got a topography to it.
It's got a topography to it, exactly right.
Oh,
And very good, John. That's right. Well done. Cooking with gas now. Yeah. It's got a topography. And if it has a topography, then it's got something that makes it have a dimension or something. It's just unsayable. Because you can't really use words like dimension or volume or weight or the usual ways of tagging something as real.
We're not saying it's withdrawn.
It's not withdrawn. No, it's not withdrawn. Why would you be worried about that?
Just saying it's not, this middle is not withdrawn.
The middle is not
From
withdrawn.
the Hegelian view, it is withdrawn from the Hegelian.
It's withdrawn from the Hegelian view, but it's not withdrawn in the...
Yeah, I'm not in general, yeah.
In negative dialectics, the negative dialectic is, it is the excluded middle, but this excluded middle is in fact the immanent processing or the surface that both doesn't fit in and makes the thing real. Okay, so now, any questions on that so far?
So, excluded middle, the excess, etc., etc. Is that like the side and the nut side, but maybe the nut side kind of is a little bit more than the side, so it has a...
No.
So in Hegelian, it just cuts off the excess.
No. Now let's do it again. So we have all that's on this side and all that's on that side taken together creates the whole picture. We can't go, this one side can't go running off further and this one sort of catching up with it, right? They're always on the same playing field. I go this way, it goes this way. It's like a mirror, right? It'd be very weird if you were looking in the mirror and suddenly you started going like this and you were actually going like that, right? So whatever you're doing in the mirror is doing it back, right? There's no excess in that sense. So what becomes the excess? What is excessive to this point-per-point relationship? What becomes excessive to it? So we're looking at the mirror, and between, let's pretend I'm the mirror, that I'm you, right? So, you know. Okay. Now, what's between me and Andre?
Plane of the glass.
The plane of glass, which is the excluded middle. And it's that which is allowing us to have this like mad game. So I'm showing it to you like this because this is on the other side of that, but we could easily do the mirror bit, and then you're in front of me, but there's still something that is between us that keeps you there and alt you here. And alt you and you are the same you. It's just that there's something that's separating that. So, like I said, it'd be very odd if alt Andre started doing something else, dancing, you know, brushing his teeth while you're...
Like in Alice. Like in
Alice.
So you looking
Oh, I see.
That's what he does. Is just brilliant.
That's what, who does? Lewis
Lewis
Carroll.
Carroll.
Does what?
The opposite. He makes the mirror Alice do different things. So he like breaks the dimension.
Right. Yes, that is brilliant.
Yeah.
But that is not what we're talking about.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's all right. It's just that
It's
I just want you to get a sense of how everything is like, you know, it's moving. So whether or not it's on one side or the other side, or whether or not it's in a mirror so we're in front of each other, or whether or not the excluded middle is actually the surface of a table, it doesn't really matter where the excluded middle sits. Visually, in your mind, you might be thinking that the excluded middle is in fact the middle between us or between these two things. But in fact, the excluded middle could be wherever.
Is it everything that isn't those two things?
No, because you wouldn't say the surface of this table is everything that is not the table. The surface of the table only makes sense in relationship to the table. You say seize the donut? What happens to people on the couch? I know, it's like you become another
They're
entity.
the back of the bus.
That's right.
I just turned around and said, I like the donut. And I said, you drew the donut, and you said, carpe donut.
God. Just don't listen to them for a second.
So, yeah.
Try and focus on the
So,
side.
yeah, philosophy.
That's right, yeah. Hello. So the surface is not also this cup of coffee. The surface is linked to the actual thing that it's attached to. If I throw this surface off somewhere, it's no longer a surface. It's whatever it is, it's blah. It's only a surface when it's attached to the structure, yeah.
Is it negative space around the object is also a surface?
No, just think that the negative is the name of surface. It's not beyond the surface. You're thinking in physics terms, and that's not allowed at the moment. That's next semester, okay? Adorno is just explaining that the excluded middle is a surface. Yeah? You're right on a meta level or on another level or on an Einsteinian move that's going to happen next semester. But this semester, we're going to stay with the excluded middle being connected to the surface. Or it is the surface, rather. So the surface is here, it's here, that's also the surface, or it's here. The surface allows for the structure to be complete. The surface is both part of the structure, because it's the surface, but it's also not part of the structure, precisely because it's the surface. Yeah, like your skin, really, in a certain sense, I guess.
Yeah, you can shed layers.
You can shed layers, and then it's not really your skin, it's
In
dead.
this case, it's closed.
It's closed. No.
No, because that's not part of you, is it?
Well, if it is part of you, that's kind of...
That's like a
You cannot go
tablecloth.
naked.
Well, you can go naked.
Well, you theoretically can, it's like a slave, you can go away from something, but you cannot.
No. Let's start again. This is... Okay.
Yeah, we're getting here.
We're getting here.
We're getting here. We've got the dialectical burger. The coffee bean.
The coffee bean, yeah, we're getting a whole menu now. Okay, try it again. All that there is on one side, and all that there's not is on the other side. Taken together creates, what, if you have these two put together, synthesis. And then what happens with the synthesis?
Ground.
Where does it go? It comes around and forms the ground. Now it doesn't really run and jog over to form the ground, while this whole movement is happening instantaneously. So what I'm asking you to think is to get your mind, the muscle of your mind, to think about how something can both move and stay exactly in the same spot. It's called time. And that's what he's getting at here. And Adorno is going to call it history. Just put that down so you know that, because we'll get to it eventually. So all that's on this side and all that's on that side creates part of the picture. But if this were the whole story, as Hegel explained 3 weeks ago, if this were the whole picture, we'd only have a tautology. A equals not A. Not A equals A. That's a tautology. It doesn't tell you anything. So you need something extra. You need to add something. Remember Hegel added, what did he add to make something have meaning?
Doubt.
No, well, nothing. He added nothing, the no thing. He added the non-mediated. Okay, so then it gets expressed, it comes back around and forms the ground. And so for Hegel, it's a neat process. And what Adorno is interested in is this part of the process which just sort of gets discussed in some sort of light way. Well, not really in Hegel, to be honest. You just see a lot of Hegelian fans going, ah, anyway, just this bit here, Adorno is now saying that the excluded middle, which is a fiction in a certain sense, in the sense that it is excluded because it's neither part of this side nor is part of this side, but in fact it's part of both sides and no side at the same time. So it's excluded middle because it's both part of something and not part of something exactly at the same moment. It's an anti-Newtonian physics moment going on, this thing. It's both part of it and not part of it at the same time. Hence, they call it the excluded middle. The same thing is going to be said about this thing called the surface. It's part of the structure, but at the same time, it's not part of the structure. That's why clothes really isn't the thing, because you can put your clothes on, you can take your clothes off, you can take your hair off, but you can't really take the whole skin off. You can't really step outside your skin. I mean, you could, but then you'd be dead, right? So that would be a problem, you know, I would think. Yeah, so the idea is that you can't try and remember that a surface is something that you can't shed. If you're able somehow to shed it, like someone comes along and slices it off, it's no longer the surface. What's that? Well, it's like, yeah, then it's just no longer part of the structure. Snake, we got that. This is an echo over here.
So I'm just getting
Okay. You're drawing the snake, are you? Okay.
You boys are going to get sworn at.
That's right.
So we're enjoying this.
Okay, ready? So can we move on to the next sentence? We're on page 4. Okay. All right. It's 7:30, so we got to kind of... Okay, so could we now move to, just because I want to get to the next thing, the logic of disintegration, which is the page that's going to be on. So that page is... Sorry. It's called, I left my book in my house, so I apologize. All right. Okay, so if we can go now to page 134, the indissoluble something. So try and find page 134. Try and not yawn. So.
Bode well.
Are we there? Did it die? Oh, it doesn't have a, that doesn't,
It's only got caught the third of the book, isn't it?
it doesn't have page 134 in there?
No.
It won't let you, 'cause you have to buy it.
We must buy the rest of it for $25.95.
Okay, mine has it. Has anybody been able to get it? Yeah, do you have it? Oh, great. Okay, some people, oh, your book is falling apart. Oh, well, what are you gonna read then?
Well, I can look up.
Oh, yeah, good
Just
point.
to help you.
Okay.
Karma?
It's my karma. Oh, I've got to read it.
No, I want someone to read it, but we'll, okay, so, let me just, there
Passing it
we go. Okay, let's hang on to it for a second. It's 134, I said, right?
135.
What is it?
135, because 134 is empty.
Oh, interesting concept.
We're almost there. Okay.
You can just type it in, Johnny.
No, too late. Okay, here we are. The indissoluble something. Sophie, you want to give it a go?
Oh. Shouldn't have said anything, should I?
Yeah, right. Now notice he's got something in quotes here.
The indissoluble something. There is no being without entities. Something, as a cogitatively indispensable substrate of any concept, including the concept of being, is the utmost abstraction of the subject matter that is not identical with thinking, an abstraction not to be abolished by any further thought process. Without something, there is no thinkable formal logic, and there is no way to cleanse this logic of its metalogical rudiment. The supposition of an absolute form of something at large that might enable our thinking to shake off that subject matter is illusionary. Constitutive for the form of subject matter at large is the substantive experience of subject matter. Correlatively, at the subjective counterpole, the pure concept, the function of thinking, is not to be radically segregated from the entity I. Idealism's
Materialism, you can skip over that part.
Materialism, ever since Fichte, was that the movement of abstraction allows us to get rid of that from which we abstract. It is eliminated from our thought, banished from the realm where the thought is at home, but not annihilated in itself. The faith in it is magical.
Okay, what do you think he's talking about here? I fear that you haven't really read this bit. What do you think he's talking about? What is this indissoluble something that he's saying that if you have this moment of thought and that something is indissoluble, what is the indissoluble something? What exists as this thing? What is he speaking about? Dane, give it a go.
Well, if it's indissoluble, it can't be synthesized, it can't be divided, split.
And what is this indissoluble something for him? For anybody, what is indissoluble something?
It's
The thing that won't go away, isn't it?
Won't go away.
the thing that you can't speak. It's the unsayable.
And why is this, why do you think, because I have a feeling you haven't really read this as coherently as you'd like to, why do you think this is a problem for him? Why is this being set up as an issue? What is the problem with the indissoluble something? Oh, we're getting very warm, good. Good, Leslie. So, if something is indissoluble, it means it can't go away. If it's an indissoluble something, what type of, okay.
Well, is it linked to the ego and the identity? Well, he says the I, but it's the non-identity then?
It's a non-identity. So let's try it again, that's warm.
Does it create a gap for the excluded other?
So let's do it like this. If we know that the excess is that which does not fit in, which is the surface, he's going to make a claim about this surface. He's going to say that this surface has something to it. Not only does it not dissolve when you're thinking about the concept, so not only does the surface always exist in connection with the object, but there's something else that the surface is able to do. What is the surface able to do? Why does he put so much stake in the surface?
Describe the whole thing.
No, it doesn't describe.
It resists being appropriated.
It resists being appropriated. And why does it resist being appropriated? Or how does it resist it? How does it resist it, and why is that important?
By being other, by being
Access.
Well,
It's
there's
not
no
an
other
abstract-
side to it. There's no non.
There's no nothing to it. So it's the surface, this is the surface. To say that it's resisting, to say that it's consciously resisting is to not understand how a surface is operating. There's no intention in the surface. But the surface gives a platform around which movement can happen, for good or for bad, or for something else in between. So he's saying that the ego I creates a very specific kind of identity, but this indissoluble something allows for that which does not fit in to operate. And therefore the indissoluble something, as he develops in this argument, is is connected to, or in fact is the expression of, creative power. Without the indissoluble something, one cannot think, one cannot create, one cannot go from point A to B. It's this thing that allows for a certain form of power, which he is calling the political, to happen. So for Adorno, the political is located in the aspect of that which does not fit in. That's not to say there's no such thing as politics in the rest of the social environment. It's to say that if you want to create real change, that has to be part of this surface. So he goes further in the argument and says, this is why the indissoluble something is very frightening. Because it actually has real power. It's not the real power that Hegel was addressing to the slave, in that sense, the slave just wants to walk away, but that the environment can alter if this indissoluble something can be arranged differently. Because it's not a passive expression of just the structure, this indissoluble something. It's also something that creates the structure. So it's both an expression of the structure, and it also helps form the structure. It's an expression and it forms. If it were simply the excluded middle, it would have no resonance. But he's saying here's the second problem with Hegel's move. He doesn't understand how being politically active actually works. Being politically active on the surface level, on the so-called superficial level, is crucial for making the moment occur that the structure can change. The structure isn't the only thing that has power in the equation. But it's a very odd form of power, and that's why you need to keep hearing this very differently. This indissoluble something is not like the kind of power where we just stand up and go, we're going to fight, because that's part of being within the structure. It's another kind of version. So he says here, once dialectics has become inescapable, it cannot stick to its principle like ontology and transcendental philosophy. It cannot be maintained as a structure that will stay basic no matter how it is modified. So he's basically saying, think about it. The structure produces the surface. The surface names or gives shape, or is the last feature of the structure. But if you could change the surface, you could change the structure, because they're together. So it means that you need to realize this relationship between structure and surface. First of all, that there is one. Are you all right?
Is that related to this thing that your other was saying about the normal curve? And that if you move yourself in some way or another from out of the normal bit to an extreme somewhere, the curve will move with you?
Yes, exactly right. Can you rephrase that, because people didn't hear about that?
Well, I'm not sure about the normal curve bit, but it's a distribution curve of all anything that you look at statistically. So, for instance, us as students, if you looked at, I don't know, time people got up in the morning, or just anything, and plot it on a graph and turn that into a curve, that there's a normal, it's called a normal curve, and it's that sort of shape. And so we're all on that curve. So we're able, by altering what we do, to kind of take the curve with you, in a way.
Want to try it one more time? Right, you're completely right. Are people hearing what Tamsin's saying?
Yeah, it's good.
You're part of the curve,
yeah.
so you can influence the curve.
Yeah.
Very good. Would you say that that's true, Frank?
So now you're getting really into statistics, but you're talking about the normal bell curve, And as long as you have independent random variables, that bell curve always looks like a bell. It may be deeper or wider, but it's always that same shape. And you can move that shape right and left, up and down. It'll retain that shape. Or you can change the randomness of the variable. So in this case, taking out my skis here, perhaps affecting the surface, and by changing the randomness of the variable, you will then actually change the shape of the curve itself.
That's very good, Tamsin. That's very good for you.
You can come again.
Can you tell them that word that you used?
Are there
Askesis. Can you?
Oh, the epsilon?
Yeah, epsilon. Yeah.
Are there statistics people in here?
There are people that will understand statistics.
Okay,
Yeah.
because I'm not one. So
Yeah.
that way,
So
I can sound like
you're
it.
safe.
This gives me an opportunity to actually sound smart without actually being approved of it. There's this theory that you can plot what is going to happen based on a series of variables, right? And you just y equals x plus a, b, c, d, so on and so forth, and then you draw a line. And the simplest way to do it is something like, you know, the y-axis, let's say, is ice cream sales, and the x-axis is days, right? If I start my days in May, by the time I get to August, it'll seem like the number of days that pass actually increase ice cream sales. Well, that's really not really the case. It's really with heat, right? It's causing it. You don't really get that out. So you end up having a lot of variables. You add in the number of days that pass, the temperature, and so forth. And you plot all these things, like these little dots all over the place. And then there's a concept called linear regression, in which you draw a line, in which you try to find the shortest distance between what the line you've drawn and the square of the difference between these dots. It does it, right? Draws it out. The problem with this is you can never know all the variables. So they add in this little thing called epsilon, which is this sort of, I guess we might call
the unsayable
the unsayable something. It's this other piece that we just don't know what that is. And so it's called epsilon. And so that's added into the formula, and then you draw this line. And the line is sort of what you can then project what you think is going to happen based on.
Thank you. And now, Tamsin, say what you said again. One last time, because I think that brings us properly to a close.
We will be plotted on this bell curve, this normal curve, in all sorts of ways, and we can choose to move where we are out of the most normal part of it into the sort of more, both ends are less typical, they're more diverse. The middle bit is the most kind of typical. So you can, I'm assuming, you can deliberately decide to move where you are on that distribution, and because the curve is a whole, it's sort of, the curve will shift as well.
Only if you can cause enough people to move with you.
Certainly, the more people you influence, the more skew you get.
Yeah.
Now we're moving into politics. So, just to wrap, because we're now really past the hour here, just to make sure